On what should have been her 5th wedding anniversary, Vivienne Cross wasn't unwrapping a diamond. She was staring at divorce papers and a $5,000 check to get lost. Broken and discarded, she vanished into the night, leaving her husband to believe she was gone forever. But the man who threw her away like trash is now begging for the money to save his life. 5 years after being exiled, Vivienne has returned to the boardroom, no longer a wife, but the mystery billionaire holding the leash to his entire empire. This is a story of betrayal, a brutal rise to power, and the ultimate corporate takedown. Buckle up. The air inside Le Coucou was thick with the scent of truffle oil and old money, but for Vivienne Sterling, it smelled like impending doom. It was their 5th anniversary. She had worn the emerald dress. Grant liked the one that matched his eyes, and she had arrived 15 minutes early. She sat at the corner table, clutching a small velvet box containing a vintage Patek Philippe watch she had saved for 3 years to buy. She had sold her grandmother's engagement ring to afford it. It was meant to be a peace offering, a way to bridge the icy distance that had grown between them since Grant's tech firm, Sterling Dynamics, had gone public. Grant arrived 20 minutes late. He didn't apologize. He didn't even sit down. He stood by the table, his silhouette cutting through the ambient golden light of the restaurant. He looked every inch the tech mogul bespoke Tom Ford suit, jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and eyes that were completely, terrifyingly empty. "Grant?" Vivienne whispered, half rising. "Happy anniversary." "Sit down, Viv," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was bored. He signaled to a man, standing near the entrance. A lawyer. Vivienne recognized him, Simon Kress, the Sterling family's fixer. Simon approached the table and placed a thick manila envelope next to the breadbasket. "What is this?" Vivienne asked, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It's over," Grant said, checking his phone. "I'm filing for divorce. Irreconcilable differences. But since we didn't sign a prenup, and I don't want a media circus, Simon has drafted a settlement." Vivienne felt the blood drain from her face. "Divorce? Grant, we just bought the house in Greenwich. I'm late. I think I might be pregnant." The lie, or rather, the hope, spilled out before she could stop it. She wasn't pregnant, but she needed something, anything, to make him look at her. Grant finally looked at her. A smirk curled the corner of his lip. "Don't embarrass yourself, Viv. We haven't slept together in 6 months. And frankly, you don't fit the brand anymore." "The brand?" "I'm moving Sterling Dynamics into the global defense sector," Grant said, smoothing his tie. "I need a partner who understands power. Who comes from it? You're a librarian's daughter from Ohio. You were cute when I was a startup nobody in a garage. Now, you're a liability. You wear off-the-rack clothes to galas. You don't know which fork to use. You're small." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Jessica Vane is waiting in the car." The name hit her like a physical blow. Jessica Vane, the heiress to the Vane shipping fortune. A woman who appeared on the cover of Forbes and Vogue in the same month. "She's pregnant," Grant said casually. "With a son. A real heir." Vivienne's hand shook as she reached for the water glass. She knocked it over. Ice water soaked the white tablecloth, dripping onto the envelope. "Clumsy," Grant sighed. "Just sign the papers, Viv. I'm being generous. There's a check for $5,000 in there, enough to get you back to Ohio and start over. If you fight me, Simon will bury you. We'll leak stories that you're unstable, an alcoholic, maybe worse." Simon, the lawyer, uncapped a fountain pen and held it out. "Sign here, Mrs. Sterling, page 4. Vivienne looked around the restaurant. People were staring. The humiliation burned hotter than the tears welling in her eyes. She looked at the man she had supported when he couldn't afford instant noodles, the man whose panic attacks she had soothed at 3 a.m. She took the pen. Her hand trembled so violently she could barely form the letters. She signed Vivienne Sterling. "Good," Grant said, snatching the papers. He didn't look at her again. "Uber is outside. Don't go back to the penthouse. Your things have already been packed and sent to a storage locker in Queens. The code is 1984. He turned and walked out. Simon followed. Vivienne sat alone in the wreckage of her marriage. The waiter approached, looking pitying. Madame, can I get you anything? Vivienne stood up. She picked up the velvet box with the Patek Philippe watch. She walked to the nearest trash can, dropped it in, and walked out into the rain. The next 3 months were a blur of cheap motels and the sterile smell of the storage unit in Queens. Grant hadn't been lying. He had erased her. When she tried to access their joint account, it was frozen. When she called their friends people she had hosted for Thanksgiving dinners, they didn't pick up. The social circle of New York's elite was a fortress, and the drawbridge had been pulled up. Vivienne moved into a basement studio in Astoria that smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. She got a job as a night shift data entry clerk for a logistics company, typing numbers until her eyes burned, just to pay the rent. She was 27 years old. She had no degree. She had dropped out to help Grant build his first prototype. She had no network. She was a ghost. But grief has a way of turning into something else when it's left to ferment. In the silence of that basement apartment, Vivienne's sadness began to calcify into a cold, hard rage. One rainy Tuesday, in November, a letter arrived. It wasn't a bill. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with a wax seal. The return address was a law firm in Zurich, Switzerland, Holloway and Associates. Vivienne opened it with a dull knife. Dear Miss Cross, formerly Sterling, it is with solemn duty that we inform you of the passing of your great-uncle, Alistair Cross. As his only living relative, you have been named the sole beneficiary of the Cross Family Trust. Vivienne frowned. She didn't know an Alistair Cross. Her father had been an orphan. He rarely spoke of his family. He had always said they were bad people. She almost threw the letter away, thinking it was a scam. But there was a plane ticket included. First class, JFK, to Zurich. With nothing left to lose, Vivienne took the flight. Switzerland was gray and imposing. The law office was located in a building that looked older than the United States. She was met by a man named Arthur Pendleton, a silver-haired executor with eyes that seemed to see right through her cheap coat. Alistair was a complicated man, Arthur said, pouring her tea. He was the black sheep of the Cross banking dynasty. He didn't believe in banks. He believed in leverage. He was a silent investor. He bought shadows. Shadows? Vivienne asked. Distressed assets, Arthur corrected. Companies on the brink of failure that had valuable patents. Real estate ignored by the market. He played the long game. And he watched you, Vivienne. Arthur slid a black leather binder across the mahogany desk. He watched you build Sterling Dynamics from the shadows. He saw you write the code for Grant's first algorithm when Grant was too drunk to focus. He saw you negotiate the supplier contracts that saved the company in 2019. He knew that you were the brain, and Grant was just the face. Vivienne felt a lump in her throat. Nobody knows that. Alistair knew, and he hated that you let yourself be erased. Arthur opened the binder. He left you everything. But there is a condition. Vivienne looked at the numbers on the page. She blinked. Sure, she was misreading them. It wasn't millions. It was billions. The assets included a controlling stake in a lithium mine in Nevada, a biopharmaceutical firm in Singapore, and a shell company called Obsidian Capital that held silent shares in half of the Fortune 500. What is the condition? Vivienne whispered. Arthur leaned forward. You cannot touch a dime for personal luxury for 5 years. You must take over Obsidian Capital. You must learn the trade. You must become the investor he knew you could be. If you fail to grow the portfolio by 20% in 5 years, the money goes to charity. Vivienne looked at her reflection in the darkened window of the office. She saw the tired eyes, the cheap haircut, the woman who had been discarded for $5,000. And if I succeed? Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin. Then you become the most powerful woman on Wall Street, and you can buy whatever or whoever you want. Vivienne closed the binder. She thought of Grant's laugh as he signed the papers. She thought of Jessica Vane's swollen belly. I don't need 5 years, Vivienne said, her voice steady for the first time in months. I'll do it in 3. Teach me. That day, Vivienne Sterling died in Zurich. Vivienne V. Cross was born. 3 years later, New York City had changed, but the game remained the same. The hungry ate the weak. Grant Sterling was currently the king of the jungle. Sterling Dynamics had just unveiled the Aegis system, an AI-driven defense network that the Pentagon was drooling over. Grant's face was on every magazine stand. He was the man of the decade. Jessica Vane was by his side, the perfect trophy wife, holding their toddler son for the cameras. But behind the scenes, Sterling Dynamics was bleeding. The development of the Aegis system had gone way over budget. Grant had leveraged the company to the hilt, borrowing billions from Asian banks to finish the prototype. He was cash poor and desperate for a liquidity injection before the quarterly earnings call next month. If the stock dipped below a certain point, his loans would be called in, and he would lose control of the company. He needed a savior. He had scheduled a meeting with Obsidian Capital, a mysterious private equity firm that had exploded onto the scene 2 years ago. Nobody knew who ran it. They only knew that Obsidian didn't just invest. They took over. They had hostilely acquired 3 of Grant's competitors and stripped them for parts. Grant wasn't worried, though. He was Grant Sterling. He could charm anyone. The meeting was set at the Mandarin Oriental in the presidential suite. Grant walked in, flanked by Simon Kress and his CFO. The room was breathtaking, overlooking Central Park, but the temperature was set freezing cold. Sitting in a high-backed leather chair, facing the window was a figure, a woman. She didn't turn around when they entered. "Mr. Sterling," a voice came from the chair. It was low, distorted slightly by the acoustics of the chair, or perhaps intent. "You're late." "My apologies," Grant said, flashing his million-dollar smile. "Traffic in the city is a nightmare. I'm eager to meet the genius behind Obsidian. I hear you're interested in the future of defense." The chair slowly swiveled around. Grant froze. The woman sitting there was stunning. She wore a white Alexander McQueen suit that looked like it cost more than Grant's first house. Her hair was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob, dyed a platinum blonde, so pale it was almost white. She wore dark, oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes completely. She didn't look like Vivienne. She looked like a weapon, but there was something about the set of her jaw. "Miss?" Grant faltered, looking for a nameplate. "You can call me Miss Cross," she said. She didn't take off her sunglasses. "Miss Cross. Pleasure," Grant recovered. "Look, I'll cut to the chase. Sterling Dynamics is the future. We need a bridge loan of $500 million to roll out the Aegis system. In return, I'm willing to offer Obsidian a 5% stake." The woman laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. 5%? She repeated. She picked up a file from her desk. "Grant, your debt-to-equity ratio is 4-1. Your VP of engineering just resigned because you cut his bonus. And Jessica Vane, your wife, has been seen spending nights at the Pierre Hotel, not at your penthouse. Rumor has it, the perfect marriage is on the rocks because you gambled her dowry on crypto." Grant's face went pale. "How do you— That is private information. It's due diligence," she said coldly. "I'm not interested in 5%, Grant. I'm interested in 40%. 40, Simon Kress shouted. "That's insanity. That would give you controlling interest with the board." "Take it or leave it," she said, checking her watch, a vintage Patek Philippe. "You have loans due in 3 weeks. The Bank of Tokyo won't extend. I bought their debt note this morning." Grant stared at her. The air left the room. You own my debt?" "I own you, Grant," she said softly. "I can foreclose on Sterling Dynamics tomorrow. I can strip the Aegis patent and sell it to Lockheed. Or you can sign over 40% of the company, give me 3 seats on the board, and I keep you afloat." Grant was sweating now. He loosened his tie. He felt trapped, like a rat in a maze he didn't design. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Why are you doing this?" She finally reached up and removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were piercing green, the same eyes he had looked into for 5 years. But the warmth was gone, replaced by the cold steel of a woman who had walked through hell. She waited for the recognition to hit him. "Hello, Grant," Vivienne said. "Happy anniversary." The silence in the suite at the Mandarin Oriental stretched so thin it felt like it might snap and take someone's head off. Grant Sterling stared at the woman across from him. He blinked, trying to superimpose the image of his mousy, obedient ex-wife over this ice-cold titan of industry. It didn't fit. The Vivienne he knew wore oversized sweaters and apologized when other people bumped into her. The woman sitting here, V, cross, looked like she could eat him alive and not even check her teeth for bones. Vivienne? Grant choked out, a nervous laugh bubbling up. Is this a joke? Did you win the lottery or something? Look, you look great, really, but playing dress up doesn't make you a CEO. He turned to Simon Kress, his lawyer. Get security. Tell them my ex-wife is stalking me. Vivienne didn't move. She didn't even blink. She just tapped a manicured fingernail on the leather binder in front of her. Sit down, Grant, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of an anchor dropping. I'm leaving, Grant sneered, buttoning his jacket. And I'm calling the police. You think you can buy my debt? With what? Alimony money? I bought your debt with the Cross family fortune, Vivienne said calmly. And if you walk out that door, Simon, I will trigger the default clause on the Sterling Dynamics loan. The deadline was 9 a.m. this morning. It is now 9:15. Simon Kress froze. He looked at the paperwork Vivienne had slid across the table. His face went from flushed to ghostly pale in seconds. Grant, Simon whispered, his voice trembling. Grant, stop. Look at the signature on the purchase order. It's verified by the SEC. She owns the debt note. All $800 million of it. Grant stopped with his hand on the doorknob. What? If she calls the default, Simon continued, sweat beading on his forehead, the bank seizes your assets immediately. The penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the company jet, and your 51% controlling stake in Sterling Dynamics. Grant turned back slowly. The arrogance was leaking out of him, like air from a punctured tire. You wouldn't. You built that company with me. I built it for you, Vivienne corrected, standing up. She was wearing heels that made her taller than him. She walked around the desk, invading his personal space. I wrote the code for the compression algorithm while you were partying in Ibiza. I secured the seed funding while you were sleeping off hangovers. And when you threw me out like garbage, you thought I was the weak link. She leaned in close. He could smell her perfume, something expensive, smoky, and dangerous. I'm not the weak link, Grant. I was the foundation. And you took a sledgehammer to it. Grant swallowed hard. What do you want, Viv? Revenge? Is that it? Fine. You want more money? I can double the settlement. 10,000? 20? Vivienne laughed. It was a genuine, terrifying sound. Oh, Grant, you still think this is about money. This is about competence. She walked back to her chair and sat down, crossing her legs. Here are the new terms. Obsidian Capital, that's me, converts the debt into 40% equity. I get 3 seats on the board, and I am appointed as the interim chief strategy officer, effectively immediately. You want to work for me? Grant scoffed, trying to regain some ground. You'll be my subordinate. No, Vivienne said, her eyes flashing. I'll be your babysitter. I'm going to clean up your mess, secure the Aegis contract, and make sure you don't bankrupt the company before the fiscal year ends. And if you refuse, I foreclose. Today, you lose everything. Jessica goes back to her daddy, and you go back to the garage. Grant looked at Simon. Simon nodded grimly. There was no way out. Grant picked up the pen. His hand shook, mirroring the way Vivienne's had shaken 5 years ago in the restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on her. He signed. Welcome aboard, partner, Vivienne said, snapping the folder shut. I'll see you at the office on Monday. Have my office ready, the corner one next to yours. And Grant? He looked up, defeated. Get rid of the secretary you're sleeping with. It's unprofessional. News of the merger hit Wall Street like a bomb. Sterling Dynamics, saved by mystery firm Obsidian Capital. The stock jumped 15% overnight. But the real drama wasn't on the ticker tape. It was in the tabloids. New York's elite were buzzing about the upcoming winter solstice gala at the Met. It was the event of the season, hosted by the Vane family, Jessica's family. Everyone who was anyone would be there. Grant Sterling arrived in a tuxedo, looking stressed but handsome. On his arm was Jessica Vane. She looked every bit the billionaire heiress, in a custom red Valentino gown, diamonds dripping from her neck. She was smiling for the cameras, but her eyes were tight. She had heard about the new partner. She had heard it was a woman. Grant had refused to tell her the name, only saying it was a business necessity. "Relax, darling," Jessica hissed through her teeth as they posed on the red carpet. "You look like you're walking to the gallows. We are the power couple here. Remember that." "You don't understand," Grant muttered, adjusting his cufflinks. "She's coming." "Who? This investor?" Jessica rolled her eyes. "Let her come. I'll make sure she knows her place. New money is so tacky." Inside, the great hall of the museum was transformed into a winter wonderland. Waiters passed champagne. The air was filled with polite chatter and the clinking of crystal. Suddenly, the room went quiet. At the top of the grand staircase, a woman appeared. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve, with a train that flowed behind her like liquid night. It was sleek, modern, and utterly commanding. Around her neck was a necklace that made Jessica's diamonds look like costume jewelry, a single, massive sapphire surrounded by white diamonds, the Star of Bombay. It had been missing from auction houses for decades. It was Vivienne. She descended the stairs alone. No date, no entourage. She moved with a feline grace that demanded attention. "Who is that?" a socialite whispered near Jessica. Is that the ex-wife?" another murmured. "The one Grant dumped?" Jessica stiffened. She recognized her. It had been 5 years, and Vivienne looked different, harder, sharper, richer, but it was her, the woman Jessica had laughed at from the back of the limousine. Grant felt like he couldn't breathe. Vivienne reached the bottom of the stairs and was immediately swarmed, not by gossip columnists, but by the heavy hitters, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, the senator from New York. They were lining up to shake her hand. "She's the head of Obsidian," someone whispered. "She just bought the steel mills in Pittsburgh." Jessica's face turned a mottled shade of red. She let go of Grant's arm and marched toward Vivienne. The crowd parted. A confrontation was brewing, and the elite lived for blood sport. "Well, well," Jessica said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness as she blocked Vivienne's path. "If it isn't the little librarian. I didn't know the staff was allowed to mingle with the guests." Vivienne paused. She looked at Jessica, then slowly scanned her up and down. Her expression was one of mild amusement, like she was looking at a child throwing a tantrum. "Hello, Jessica," Vivienne said smoothly. "Nice dress. Valentino, Spring 2024 collection, right? I saw it on the rack. I decided it was a bit seasonal, but you pull it off." A few people nearby chuckled. Jessica bristled. "I'm surprised you could afford a ticket," Jessica snapped. "Or did Grant give you a pity invite? You always were a charity case." Actually, Vivienne took a sip of champagne. "I didn't buy a ticket. I bought the museum wing." Silence rippled through the circle. "Excuse me?" Jessica blinked. "The new Asian art wing," Vivienne said, gesturing to the banner hanging above them. "The Alistair Cross Memorial Wing. I donated $40 million to the museum this morning to finalize the construction. Technically, Jessica, you're standing in my house." Jessica's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vivienne stepped closer, dropping her voice so only Jessica and Grant, who had just rushed up, could hear. "And by the way, Jessica, I heard about the trouble with your family's shipping company. Vane Logistics is heavily leveraged in the Panama Canal expansion, isn't it? It would be a shame if the primary bondholder decided to call in those loans early. I'd hate for you to lose your trust fund before the baby starts private school." Jessica grabbed Grant's arm, her fingernails digging into his tuxedo. "Grant, do something. She's threatening us." Grant looked at Vivienne. He saw the cold resolve in her eyes. He realized, with a sinking horror, that she wasn't bluffing. She had done her homework. She had targets on everyone. "Jess, come on," Grant muttered, trying to pull her away. "Not here." "No." Jessica pulled away, her composure cracking. "She's a nobody. She's nothing." "I'm the majority shareholder of your husband's company," Vivienne stated clearly, loud enough for the press to hear. "And as of Monday, I'm the one signing his paychecks. She turned to Grant, her eyes devoid of any love that had once existed. Grant, I expect the quarterly reports on my desk by 8 a.m. Don't be late. We have a lot of work to do to fix the mess you've made. Vivienne turned and walked away, the blue velvet train trailing behind her. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide path for the new Queen of New York. Grant was left standing in the middle of the ballroom, his wife hyperventilating beside him as the cameras flashed blindingly in his face. He realized then that Vivienne hadn't just come back for the money. She had come back to take his dignity, and she was just getting started. The weeks following the winter solstice gala were not a battle. They were a slow, methodical strangulation. Grant Sterling had expected a loud, messy corporate divorce. He expected screaming matches in the hallway, lawyers throwing injunctions like confetti, and the kind of public brawling that landed on page 6. But Vivienne Cross didn't fight like a scorned ex-wife. She fought like a private equity algorithm, cold, efficient, and utterly devoid of mercy. It started with the small things. Grant would call a department head to demand a status update on the Aegis system, only to be told, "Miss Cross has already reviewed that file, sir." She suggested a pivot to the medical diagnostic application. "We're implementing her changes now." When he tried to schedule a lunch with the CEO of Lockheed Martin, a meeting he had been cultivating for 2 years, he found his access to the corporate jet blocked. Maintenance issues, the scheduler lied, her voice trembling. Grant knew better. Vivienne was using the jet to fly a team of auditors to his lithium mine in Nevada, looking for the cracks in his financial foundation. But the real humiliation came in the boardroom. Vivienne didn't sit at the head of the table. She sat to Grant's immediate right, yet every eye in the room, from the CFO to the Vane family representatives, protecting Jessica's inheritance, gravitated toward her. She spoke in low, measured tones, dissecting Grant's previous erratic spending with surgical precision. She exposed the $3 million he had consulted away to his fraternity brothers. She highlighted the bloated marketing budget for a product that didn't even work yet. Grant was becoming a ghost in his own building. He was the founder, a title that now felt like a participation trophy. By mid-February, the walls were closing in. The Vane family was panicking. Jessica's father, Richard Vane, had called Grant 3 times in 1 week, his voice dropping from polite concern to open threats. "Fix this, Grant," the old man had growled, "or we pull our liquidity. We won't let that woman cannibalize our investment." Grant knew he had no choice. He couldn't beat Vivienne on the ledger. She was too smart, too wealthy, and too clean. If he wanted to survive, he had to stop playing chess and start playing dirty. He arranged a meeting with Simon Kress, not at their usual steakhouse, but at a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen called the Blue Ruin. It was 1 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The place smelled of stale beer and bad decisions. Simon looked terrible. The stress of managing Grant's collapsing house of cards had given him dark circles and a nervous tick in his left eye. "You're insane, Grant," Simon hissed, hunched over a sticky table. "She's untouchable. Her compliance team is tighter than the NSA. We've been digging for a month. There's nothing. No illicit affairs, no tax evasion, no hidden accounts." "Then we stop looking," Grant said, his hand tightening around his glass of scotch until his knuckles turned white. "And we start planting." Simon froze. "Grant, that's a felony." "It's survival," Grant snapped, his voice rising enough to make the bartender glance over. He lowered his voice to a venomous whisper. "Listen to me. The Aegis system, the core code. It's classified under the National Security Act because of the Pentagon contract, right?" "Technically, yes," Simon said warily. "So, what happens if the source code for Aegis ends up on a server in Shenzhen, China?" Grant asked, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "And what happens if the transfer logs are traced back to Vivienne's private laptop, the one she insists on using for security reasons?" Simon stared at him, horror dawning. "You want to frame her for corporate espionage, treason, practically." "I want her gone," Grant said. "I have a guy in It Davids. He owes me for covering up his DUI last year. He can spoof the IP address. He can make it look like she's been leaking data since the day she joined the board. We present the evidence at the Friday board meeting. The board will panic. They'll have to vote for her immediate removal to protect the government contracts. Once she's out, I trigger the emergency clause in the bylaws and reclaim majority control. Grant, if this goes wrong, it won't, Grant cut him off. She's arrogant, Simon. She thinks she's untouchable. She won't be looking for a knife in the back because she thinks I'm too weak to hold one. For the next 3 days, Grant played the role of the beaten dog perfectly. He arrived late to meetings, looked disheveled, and deferred to Vivienne on every minor point. He even brought her a coffee on Friday morning, placing it on her desk with a trembling hand. "Peace offering," he mumbled, refusing to meet her eyes. Vivienne paused, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. She looked at the cup, then up at him. Her green eyes were unreadable, like the surface of a deep, frozen lake. "You seem resolved, Grant," she said softly. "Did you finally accept the new reality?" "I'm just tired, Viv," he lied, backing out of the office. "I just want this company to succeed." The Friday board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. The conference room was packed. The air conditioning was humming, but Grant was sweating through his bespoke shirt. Every major stakeholder was present. The Vane family attorneys, the institutional investors from Vanguard, and the internal executive team. Vivienne sat at the center of the table, composed and elegant in a charcoal suit. Grant stood at the front of the room, clutching a clicker. "Thank you all for coming," Grant began, his voice gaining strength. "I called this emergency session because we face a crisis of leadership and a crisis of national security." The room went dead silent. Vivienne didn't move. She didn't even blink. "For the past month," Grant continued, pacing the floor, "I have been conducting a covert internal audit. I had suspicions that our proprietary data was being mishandled. I prayed I was wrong, but the evidence is irrefutable." He clicked the remote. The projector screen behind him lit up with complex server logs, lines of code, and a map with a bright red line connecting New York to a server farm in China. "These are transfer logs from our secure R&D server," Grant declared, pointing at the screen. "Last night, at 3 a.m., the entire source code for the Aegis AI was uploaded to an unregistered server in Shenzhen. The encryption key used to authorize the transfer belongs to one person." He turned and pointed a shaking finger at Vivienne. "Vivienne Cross." Gasps erupted around the table. Richard Vane stood up, his face purple. "Is this true? My God, the defense contracts will be blacklisted." "I have the forensic report right here," Simon Kress said, stepping forward with a stack of bound folders. He handed them out to the terrified board members. "It confirms the MAC address of the device used. It is Miss Cross's personal MacBook Pro." Grant slammed his hand on the table, leaning toward Vivienne. "You thought you could steal my company and sell it for parts? You're not an investor, Vivienne. You're a thief. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence and the termination of Miss Cross's position, effective immediately." "Seconded," shouted the Vane representative. "Wait." The single word cut through the panic like a gunshot. Vivienne hadn't stood up. She hadn't looked at the fake evidence. She was simply looking at Grant with an expression of profound, almost pitying, disappointment. "Before you vote," Vivienne said, her voice calm and carrying to the back of the room, "I think you should see the rest of the presentation." Grant frowned. "What are you talking about? I control the projector." "Actually," Vivienne said, pulling a small tablet from her portfolio, "I control the network." She tapped her screen. The projector behind Grant flickered. The map of China disappeared. In its place, a high-definition video feed appeared. It was grainy, black and white, but the image was crystal clear. It showed the interior of Grant's office. The timestamp in the corner read Tuesday, 11:45 p.m. On the screen, Grant was pacing. Simon Kress was sitting on the couch. "Video Grant. David says the spoof is ready. We just need to plant the file on her drive." "Video Simon. Grant. If the SEC traces this, If they find out we fabricated a data breach. Video, Grant. They won't. We pin it on her. We say she was selling it to the Chinese. By the time she clears her name, I'll have control of the board again, and she'll be tied up in federal court for years. Just do it, Simon. I want her dead and buried. The silence in the boardroom now was different. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of a tomb. Grant turned slowly to look at the screen. His own face, twisted in malice, stared back at him. He felt the blood drain from his extremities. His knees buckled, and he grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright. This is a deep fake, Grant croaked, his voice cracking. AI generated. She's manipulating you. It's a trick. It's not a trick, Grant, Vivienne said, finally standing up. She towered over the table. I knew you would never accept losing. I knew you would try to cheat. So, 3 weeks ago, I had a forensic security team sweep the building. They found your guy, in it. David's? He didn't want to go to jail for you, Grant. He came to me. He's been recording everything. Simon Kress dropped the folders he was holding. They scattered across the floor, sliding under the chairs of the stunned board members. I have already forwarded this footage, along with Mr. David's sworn affidavit, to the Department of Justice, Vivienne said, checking her watch. They should be here, right about now. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the room burst open. 4 federal agents in windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI, marched in. The lead agent scanned the room. Grant Sterling? He barked. Grant stumbled back, knocking over his chair. No, wait. Jess, Richard, do something. He looked to his father-in-law. Richard Vane looked at Grant with pure, unadulterated disgust. He slowly closed the folder in front of him and turned his back. Grant Sterling, the agent continued, grabbing Grant's arm and twisting it behind his back. You are under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, and filing false statements to federal regulators. Simon Kress? Another agent asked. Simon raised his hands in surrender, tears streaming down his face. I was just following orders. He made me do it. As the handcuffs clicked shut on Grant's wrists, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. The billionaire man of the decade was being dragged out of his own boardroom like a common criminal. He looked back over his shoulder, desperate for eye contact, desperate for mercy. Vivienne was standing at the head of the table. She didn't look triumphant. She looked resolved. She met his gaze for 1 second, then turned her attention to the terrified board members. Now, Vivienne said, her voice steady and commanding, cutting through the chaos. If we can remove the trash, I believe we have a company to save. Let's turn to page 4 of the restructuring plan. The fall of Grant Sterling was not quick. It was a slow, televised dismantling of a man who had believed himself to be a god. For 6 months, the trial dominated the news cycle. It was the trial of the decade. Every morning, Vivienne watched the coverage from her corner office while sipping herbal tea. She watched as Simon Kress, desperate to avoid a 20-year sentence, turned state's witness. He sang like a canary, detailing every bribe, every falsified report, and every illegal corner Grant had cut to build Sterling dynamics. But the most brutal blow didn't come from the prosecution. It came from Jessica Vane. On the 3rd day of testimony, Jessica took the stand. She wasn't the doting wife anymore. She was a Vane. Dressed in modest black, looking tearful and fragile, she told the jury that Grant had manipulated her, that she knew nothing of his crimes, and that she was filing for an annulment based on fraud. He promised me a legacy, Jessica sobbed into a silk handkerchief, while Grant stared at her in disbelief from the defense table. But all he gave me was a lie. I am pregnant with another man's child now, a man who is honest. It was a lie. Of course, Jessica wasn't pregnant. She was just distancing herself from the radioactive fallout of the Sterling name, but it worked. The jury hated Grant. The public hated him. When the gavel finally banged down, the sentence was severe. 8 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 5. Grant was handcuffed and led away, screaming that he had been framed, that Vivienne was the devil. But nobody was listening. The cameras had already turned to the woman walking down the courthouse steps, Vivienne Cross. She wore a white suit, bright and immaculate, against the gray New York pavement. She didn't smile for the cameras. She just put on her sunglasses, got into her car, and went back to work. With Grant gone, the rot was cut out of the company. Vivienne didn't just rebrand, she reinvented. Sterling Dynamics ceased to exist. In its place, Rose Cross Industries. Her first act as CEO was to kill the military application of the Aegis system. She held a press conference that silenced Wall Street. "We will not build weapons," Vivienne announced, her voice projecting strength and calm. "The code Grant Sterling tried to sell was designed to kill. We are reprogramming it. Project Aegis will now be Project Panacea. We are using the AI to detect stage 1 pancreatic and ovarian cancers with 99% accuracy. We are going to save lives, not take them." The stock didn't crash. It soared. Vivienne became the face of ethical tech. She was on the cover of Time, Fortune, and Vogue. She was no longer just a billionaire. She was a visionary. But success is lonely if you have no one to share it with. And Vivienne had a secret that she had kept guarded behind the walls of her estate in the Hamptons. A secret that was the true source of her strength. 1 year later, the Otisville Federal Correctional Institution was a bleak concrete scar in the middle of the countryside. It was raining a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into your bones. Vivienne sat in the private visitation room. She was dressed simply in a trench coat and scarf. On the other side of the reinforced glass sat inmate 78402. Grant looked 20 years older. His thick, expensive hair was shaved close to his scalp. His skin was sallow from lack of sunlight. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by a sagging khaki jumpsuit. He looked small. He picked up the phone receiver, his hand shaking slightly. "You came," Grant rasped. His voice was hoarse. "I didn't think you would." "I had to close the file," Vivienne said, her voice steady. "I'm moving the headquarters to Paris next month. I won't be coming back to New York for a long time." Grant let out a bitter laugh. "Paris. Of course. You always wanted to go to Paris. I told you it was a waste of time." "You told me a lot of things, Grant," Vivienne said. "You told me I was small. You told me I was a liability. You told me I didn't fit the brand." Grant leaned his forehead against the glass. "I was wrong, okay? Is that what you want to hear? You won, Viv. You took my company, my money, my reputation. You took everything. Are you happy now?" "I didn't take your reputation, Grant. You sold it," Vivienne corrected him gently. "And I didn't come here to gloat. I came to give you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a single photograph. She pressed it against the glass. Grant squinted at it. It was a high-resolution photo of a young boy, about 5 years old, sitting on the steps of a brownstone. He had messy dark hair, a mischievous grin, and eyes that were unmistakably Grant's the same steel-gray irises that used to charm investors. But the shape of his face was all Vivienne. Who is that?" Grant whispered, his breath fogging the glass. "His name is Leo," Vivienne said softly. "Leo Sterling Cross." Grant's eyes widened. He looked from the photo to Vivienne, his brain struggling to compute the timeline. "Leo? But, you said, at the restaurant." "I told you I thought I was pregnant," Vivienne said. "You told me not to embarrass myself. You said we hadn't slept together in 6 months. You were wrong about that, too. It had been 4. You were just too busy with Jessica to remember." Grant made a choked sound, like he had been punched in the gut. He's mine?" "He is," Vivienne nodded. "I found out for sure a week after I arrived in Zurich. I spent my pregnancy alone, Grant. While you were planning your wedding to Jessica, I was going to doctor's appointments by myself. While you were buying yachts, I was buying cribs." "Does he know?" Grant asked, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Does he know about me?" "He knows his father is away," Vivienne said carefully. "He knows his father made some bad choices, but he is loved, Grant. He is safe, and he is kind. He is everything you forgot how to be." Grant slammed his hand against the glass. "I have a son. I have a son. Vivienne, you have to let me see him. I have rights. You have no rights, Vivian said, her voice turning to steel. You signed them away in the divorce settlement, any and all future claims. Remember? You were so eager to get rid of me, you didn't even read the fine print Simon wrote up. Grant slumped back in his chair, defeated. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had traded his wife and his unborn son for a merger that failed and a mistress who testified against him. And Jessica? Grant asked weakly. What about her baby? The heir she promised? Vivian pitied him then. There was no baby, Grant. Jessica was never pregnant. It was a trap to get you to marry her without a prenup. She's in Monaco now. She married a shipping magnate last week. Grant covered his face with his hands. He began to weep ugly, broken sobs that echoed in the small room. He was utterly alone. He had built a castle of gold, and now he was buried under it. I'm leaving now, Grant, Vivian said, standing up. She put the photo back in her bag. Wait. Leave the picture, please, Grant begged. It's all I have. Vivian paused. She looked at the man who had abandoned her. She could have left it. It would have been a mercy. But mercy was for people who learned from their mistakes. I can't, she said. He's not a souvenir. He's a person. Goodbye, Grant. She hung up the phone. Vivian walked out of the prison and into the courtyard. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, and a shaft of sunlight was hitting the wet pavement. A black Bentley was waiting for her at the gate. The driver, a large man named Arthur, who had been her uncle's bodyguard, opened the rear door. Inside, the car smelled of leather and warmth. Mommy! A small blur launched itself at her. Vivian caught Leo in her arms, burying her face in his neck. He smelled of strawberry shampoo and crayons. Hey, little man, she whispered, kissing his forehead. Did you finish your drawing? Yeah. Look! Leo held up a piece of paper. It was a drawing of a tall building with a superhero standing on top. The superhero was a woman with blonde hair. It's you, my mommy. You're saving the city. Vivian felt a lump in her throat. She buckled him into his car seat. That's right, Leo. We saved the city. Now we're going on an adventure. To Paris? Leo asked, his eyes wide. To Paris, Vivian smiled. We're going to eat croissants and see the tower. As the car pulled away, leaving the gray prison walls fading in the rearview mirror, Vivian's phone buzzed. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. She finally picked it up. It was a news alert. Forbes breaking news. The world's most powerful women list released. Hashon, Vivian Cross, the billionaire who turned tragedy into triumph. Vivian looked at the headline. 5 years ago, she had been worth $5,000 and a suitcase of old clothes. Today, she controlled the global market on medical AI. She had destroyed her enemies, not with violence, but with competence. She looked at Leo, who was staring out the window at the passing trees, singing a song to himself. She swiped the notification away and turned off her phone. Power wasn't about the ranking. It wasn't about the fear in the eyes of the board members. It wasn't even about the money. Power was the ability to walk away. Power was the freedom to choose your own family. Power was sitting in the back of a car with the person you loved most in the world, knowing that no one could ever hurt you again. Vivian Cross closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel the need to look back. She was finally free. And that brings us to the end of the saga of Vivian Cross. From a discarded wife sobbing in a restaurant to the most powerful CEO in the world, she proved that the best revenge isn't just success. It's living a life so full that the people who hurt you become irrelevant. Grant Sterling is sitting in a cell, wondering where it all went wrong, while Vivian is in Paris with the one thing money can't buy, genuine love. What did you guys think of that final twist with the child? Was Vivian right to keep Leo a secret? Or was that too cruel even for Grant? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button, share this with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and subscribe for more dramatic storytelling. Thanks for watching.